Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea Pettit. I'm head of arts at the Bagri Foundation, and thank you for joining us for the Bottom Drawer Books That Changed My Life. This forms part of the Foundation's Change theme for 2021. For the second season, we feature writers whose UK debuts have just been published, and we ask them about books that inspire them to write, around their earliest efforts, and also moments that, or books that changed their life. So for this bonus episode, I'm welcoming Saumya Roy, author of the book Mountain Tales, Love and Loss in the Municipality of Castaway Belongings, a story that charts the lives and love of trash pickers living amongst the largest landfill of Mumbai. Now, Saumya Roy is a journalist and social entrepreneur based in Mumbai, and her writing has appeared in Forbes India magazine, WSJ.com, The Wire India, and Outlook magazine, among others. But do read her full biography on our website and below this video. So I'll start off by saying thank you so much, Saumya, for joining the series.
Thank you for having me.
Right. Well, I thought we could kick off with a reading from the book, just to set the scene a bit. Would you mind doing that?
Sure. So this follows the lives of waste pickers in Deonar, and two of the main characters are Hyder Ali, who's worked there for about 18 years, and his daughter, who was born just months after he moved. So this is like almost instructions that he's passing, his observations that he's passing on to his daughter. Hyder Ali liked to tell Farzana and his siblings that there was nothing he had not seen while trolling through this sprawling necropolis. Everything that gave meaning to Mumbaikars' lives, from broken cell phones to high-heeled shoes and gangrenous dismembered limbs, ended up here. He, like most pickers, believed that the spirits of people and possessions that had been sent here for unceremonious burial hung around the windswept slopes. On delivering the Urdu books that he had found in the trash to clerics, he heard from them that God, who made people, also made spirits, and that the evil ones among them were called Shaytans. Unseen but unheard, but nevertheless tangibly present, they were said to be a manifestation of people's baser nature, their rising, unending desires. They gripped people only to lead them astray. Shaytans lived in filthy recesses and rose from smokeless fires, the clerics had told Hyder Ali. Fires simmered furtively and constantly within the mountain's layers of decaying trash. He had seen smoke that rose from fires burning within the mountains and flames that danced without smoke. At other times, flames erupted and moved like lightning across the hills, letting off swirling smoke, the two dancing together. Hyder Ali had nearly been encircled and trapped in these traveling fires. The Shaytans were bound to appear on the mountains, a dizzying accumulation of partly sated aspirations, wreathed in fires and smoke. Pickers believed Shaytans arose from them and lay in wait for new homes and younger people to inhabit. They believed Hyder Ali warned Farzana to stay away from them.
Thank you. You're such an evocative writer, and the place, like these huge landfills, is really well described there, and you really set that scene. I wondered, before we get into the detail about the individuals, could you tell me a bit about what really drew you there in the first place?
Into going there?
Yeah, what drew you to the Deonar landfill?
Sure. I had been a journalist for many years and then left to start my own nonprofit. We worked in microfinance, giving small loans to micro entrepreneurs in the city. And in 2013, we began getting waste pickers from Deonar saying they wanted loans from us. And I, would ask them, what are you going to use our loan for? You can only pick so much with your hands. What are you going to use our loan for? And they just made this place sound like it was a place of opportunity, that, this was an employer that never ran out of work, that trash would never reduce. And therefore it was just, if they had money, they could buy more, they could pick more, they could, possibly find more precious things, buy more important things. And they made it seem like a place of opportunity. And yet just by seeing them, just by one look at them, and you could see they had bruises, they had cuts, they had, a very different kind of gait from doing this kind of work, and that immediately sort of captive, I won't say in a good way, but I was captivated, let's say. And I began going there to see. And I saw it when I went there, that it was very different from any of the other slums that we worked in, because it was, the mountain was so the garbage mountains were intertwined in their life. They were eating ready to eat mixes that they found in the trash. They were wearing jewelry and clothes they found there, and they were just waiting for that one opportunity where they would just find, like, everybody knew somebody who had found a palm-sized emerald, and I never found that person. But I heard from so many people, oh, so and so found gold. Oh, so and so found an emerald. And I'm like, really, I want to meet that person, So that's how I started going there, and eventually began writing about it.
That's great. And I do love the parts in the book where somebody finds, a piece of gold or a piece of jewelry, or they're just wearing it or they're selling it. And that, as you describe, the Shaytans is a big part of also the mountains. So there's this whole allure that kind of fills the lives of the pickers. Could you talk a bit about the role of the Shaytans in their life?
Sure. I mean, right at the beginning, they would often say, oh, if you go to that place, like this place is more than 300 acres large. And so people would often say, oh, if you go there, the Shaitan trips you. I would, just let it pass. Like, I'm here to give a loan. I want to talk about this. Or if you went to their house, they were just made of plastic sheet, and they would say, oh, this is where, the khabis was floating here, and the khabis was so huge. Or, there's a character in my book who was, when he was 10 years old, and he decided to work at night, and he's walking on the garbage slopes in the middle of the night, and he says, I saw a chudel. And that's when at first I just ignored it. I thought, I didn't know what to make of it. I'm here to give a loan. But then I realized that if you were a 10-year-old on a garbage slope, on a mountain made of garbage in the middle of the night, what else would you see? That this could be, your eyes playing tricks on you. It could be the fear. It could be the trauma of being in a situation like that was coming out in this form. And so that kept growing and growing. And in the book, I also kind of use it as you could say, an allegory to show the impact of our life on these people.
Yeah, that's nice, because you're right. I think there's many of the characters' family members almost blame Shaitans for anything that goes wrong. And there's you read about Hyder Ali and Farzana at the beginning of the book in chapter 1 when you set the scene, and I wonder, what were the early drafts of the book like? Because Farzana plays a big role in the book. Could you talk a bit about those kind of early drafts?
Yeah. So when I started, I thought it would be about Salma and Bitabai, the two old women. When I thought it would be a magazine piece right after the fires, and they were my initial guides to this place. They would take me, they would walk me, their sons would walk me. And so they had both come there 40 years ago. And while the two of them kind of deny, they knew the history of this place. It was Vitabai who told me, garbage came here by train. And I was like, what? But they were full of these kind of stories. And so I thought it would be this multi-generational story of why people can't get out of poverty, why it's this crazy trap that people can't leave. So we lent to her son Nagesh, and to her grandson Vicky, who was also an alcoholic. So you would think that after 40 years that this family would be doing better better than others, but they were not necessarily doing better. And it was the same with Salma, who was just the most articulate, sharp, and someone who felt the impact of this place very deeply. So I felt some of the best quotes came from Salma. And again, she had come there as a young widow with a baby strapped to her back. And her sons had worked there. Her son had come as a baby strapped to his mother's back, and now he had children who were working there. So I thought it would be this multi-generational story of why people can't escape this trap of poverty. But then one day, borrowers would come and tell me, oh, something's going on with Farzana, something's going on with Hyder Ali's daughter. And when I went there, I realized, oh my God, like, this is a crazy story. But I must tell you that I tried to avoid writing Farzana's story for a long time, because it was traumatic for her, it was traumatic for me. And yet when I wrote the draft and anyone read it, they just told me she was glowing through them. So
That's lovely. Okay. So even through the drafts, people could feel Farzana's energy.
Yeah, even when she was not the main character, lots of people were telling me she needs to be the main character because her spirit, and she's not very verbal and not very articulate, right? But even her physical energy as a child exploring this place, what does a garbage township mean to a 10-year-old? All arms, all legs, finding things. You don't know this is not this is an unpleasant place. This is the only place you know. And she has happy memories of it. So she almost forced her way in and became the main character of this book.
That's really great, because there is obviously a really important moment in her life where things change, and I could see how you were drawn to that tale, because there's tragedy, there's love, and you're also following her for so many years. I think when we first meet her, she's young, not even 18. She's supposed to go to school but isn't interested, and then you sort of follow her throughout this book, and I found that story very powerful. Can you talk a little bit about, because you come from a journalism background, you approaching a story from a journalist perspective versus writing a book like this? How has one influenced the other?
Yeah, when I was a journalist, I never thought I would leave, and when I left, I thought I would never come back. Uh, this is one set of borrowers, but we would meet so many people like this, so many communities that are a little bit like this. So it was extremely involving work. I was very involved and I enjoyed it, and I almost thought I would never write again. So I came to the story not from a very journalistic perspective, and they drew me in very emotionally, and probably I was writing like that initially, but then I also had a lot of questions, and that was backed up by that was then backed up by research, a lot of research, which I think my journalistic background brought up those questions and made me really do all that research, which I really enjoyed. I felt it was important not to show their life like a soap opera. There was a lot happening, but you could endlessly go on with that soap opera. But it was important to show that why was this happening? How are our institutions responding to people like this or not responding to people like this? What administrative delays or malaise mean for the most vulnerable of our people? So that's where I went into it. And when I saw the records, they were equally fascinating. When I went to court, that was equally fascinating. So with all that got woven in to show the larger forces with these small lives.
Yeah, and I really loved that juxtaposition where you had the courts, what was going on in the courts, and you had Judge Oak, who's also a very strong character in the book, and him really trying to push things forward. I could almost feel the futile nature of what was going on in the courts versus what was happening with the individuals. At what point did you decide to kind of place them alongside each other to tell that story?
People would often ask me, oh, why don't these people leave? Why don't they just live elsewhere? Right? Or why don't we do something else or something? And I often felt that unless this place, they were almost living in the shadow of these mountains. And if the mountain doesn't move, how do you expect their life to change? Just the way their lives were unmoving, this place was unmoving too. Right? So when I had never been to a court before, but when I went to the court, it seemed like something would happen. Just like it seemed their life would change, but the case had already been going on for 20 years when I went.
Yeah, it really had. It really had. And it does feel like a never ending problem. And you really nicely kind of have an epilogue or a postscript that kind of talks a bit about that, bringing it right up to date. Can you tell me a bit about what's changed for you over the sort of decades that you have been following the story as well?
Yeah, I mean, at Deonar now there is a waste plant coming. It's a much smaller one than the one they had planned at first, but they are planning 2 more in that place. In front of me, I had seen hills arising across the creek where there is a new landfill, which is a more scientific landfill. So it would be wrong for me to say that I didn't see any change. I certainly did, and I did write about it also. What changed for me personally? It's one that I had, as I said, left journalism and then came back to it, came back to writing with this particular story. And it was a very involving kind of a journey. So I did a whole bunch of writing residencies. It taught me, like, I had never been to a courtroom before. So, and eventually I spent, I think, more than 200 hours in a courtroom. Yeah, a lot of that got edited because it was a bit self-indulgent.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of boring elements when you're sitting in a courtroom, because you even mentioned other cases that he's talking about before they even get to yours, which was really interesting.
Right. So also right to information, obtaining documents through the Right to Information Act, which I think in the UK is called the Freedom of Information Act. So obtaining thousands of newspapers. So I think stories teach you how to tell themselves. And this book was constantly teaching me, and I was often finding myself inadequate in writing it and then pushing myself. So it was this trying to keep pace that went on this whole time, I would say.
Now, without giving away the ending, how did you even decide, okay, I'm going to have to end this here, because it can go on forever? I guess, how did you make that decision?
Yeah. So I actually, in the postscript, we ended literally until a few months. We bring it up to just a few months ago until we went to print, which is that the Indian government has announced a $40 billion budget to deal with landfills and air pollution and that kind of thing. But my book was about the imprint that the places like this leave on people. And that is why the book actually ended with the print of this place on this person, which is Farzana, that it's not probably going to leave her, that whatever happens with these mountains, the imprint of that life and this place and our consumption is going to stay in these people.
Yeah, and I think I got that from the book quite strongly, was the impact of the Mumbai cars, those who live in Mumbai, on those who are on the outskirts, who are having to deal with all of the kind of detritus that is left behind. But even you mention in the book these little small parts where they notice that different things are coming to the landfill. So they can even see the lives of those living in Mumbai changing, which I found really fascinating. But I also would love to know, I guess, a little bit about Farzana. There's a kind of love story, and this is mentioned on some of the write-ups about the book. I guess how that came about. Did that also influence your choice in wanting to include her because of that change in her life? And yeah, I'd just love to know a bit about the love story.
When I met her, Farzana was going through that period, of knowing nothing, hoping things would work out. And I was, it was another reason why I was hesitant to talk about all the difficult things that had happened to her, because she was almost willing herself into this other life, a happier life. She was glowing with that Nadim's presence, and I was very hesitant to make her think about things that maybe she didn't want to think about. And I was seeing him coming every day and goading her into this new life. And so many of the scenes that I describe are ones that I was there, I saw them.
That's really lovely to have witnessed that then, in the change in her circumstances and having that love in her life. But you also don't glorify their lives at all on the mountains. And you said at the beginning about broken blisters on their feet and being burnt from the fires that have been burning since 2016, and the impact on their lungs and their health and how they're trying to deal with that. But again, they almost use the Shaytans as an excuse and say, oh no, it's just the Shaytans attacking us. No. How do they justify or understand that impact on their lives?
Sure. See, I feel that maybe if they could do something else, they would do it. You see them attempting different things, but not being able to do them. So this is kind of the bottom rung of Indian society, where they're not very educated. You see that shining India in the distance. If they could work if you stand on the garbage mountain, you see these new glass buildings with call centers in them and technology companies, but they are cut off. They cannot get those jobs. they would leave if they could leave, but they can't leave. What else would they do? People who are working on the Kabbaj Mountain are people who can't really work anywhere else. And so they don't really have any social mobility. And so maybe they're just accepting some of these things that, I mean, if you work on a Kabbaj Mountain, you're bound to be cut, you're bound to have blisters, and you need to get food on the table every day. So you just say, hey, I'm very strong. That lovely spirit of defiance, where they just say, hey, no, my children are very strong. What cough, what fire, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. And you power ahead. You power ahead.
I see. Yeah. So it's a coping mechanism, I suppose. And like, no, we can do this. We're strong because we're here, and this is what we do with our lives. It's I suppose I'm so focused on the book because it was so impactful, and I don't think I'll ever forget really the kind of environment that you built in this book for us to understand. But I'd love to talk a bit about your early influences, writers that you might have discovered that made you want to be a journalist or made you want to write. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. I must say that I didn't always have writing aspirations, but I did grow up as a reader. I don't remember a time when I didn't read. I read a lot of Manto, Sadat Hasan Manto, if you know. He was a very famous short story writer who also loved Bombay City. He is known for his stories relating to partition and later moved to Karachi and died there. But he wrote very strong and powerful stories related to victims of violence or partition. But also this, again, you see the streets of Bombay. When he goes to Karachi, he says, "Main chalta phirta Bombay hu." I'm a walking, talking Bombay. I'm alive because Bombay is there. So I definitely read a lot of Manto. You see the streets of Bombay, you see this highbrow and lowbrow mingling, the streets of Bombay, actors, movie stars, and then the victims of violence or partition, everything coming together in his story. So I think he maybe was some kind of an influence, certainly. I mentioned to you that I had been reading, just before I started writing this book, I reread Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck's classic on migrant laborers, farm laborers in California. And I had read it as a novel, but then I discovered that it was based on a newspaper series on migrant laborers in California. And that newspaper series was called Harvest Gypsies. And that was a non-fiction version that was a real life version of this. So what fiction writers call world building and the use of dialogue, I was seeing where that was coming from. And while what I've written is non-fiction, it's totally based on real life, but it shows that it taught me a little bit probably in terms of how to use dialogue, how to bring out character, how to understand people and understand their lives and write about them. And he also kept a diary while writing Grapes of Wrath called Working Days, which is every single day, a person like Steinbeck is going through self-doubt. He's pushing himself. He's putting words on paper. And so that was just very wonderful. It's a slim volume, but really wonderful to read. At one point, I thought there were too many characters in the book and I needed to cut some out because I couldn't handle them. And at that point, I read Najib Mahfouz's book, Medak Alley, which is again about a street. And there's lots of different people living there. And he's handled every character so beautifully. So definitely at that point, I kept many of the characters. I decided, no, if I love them, they can stay. So lots of influences like this in terms of understanding, ancient myths and their role, how people interpret them to understand larger forces. I definitely read. It was happening in front of my eyes, but definitely I thought of Marquez when I saw that.
Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. There is that kind of magic realism element, I guess, which, yeah, you're talking about the marrying up of that genre. And I love that you have a sort of diaries and nonfiction writing that then led to the Grapes of Wrath. So there is, as you say, this world building, and that makes so much sense when I think about the way that your book was laid out and explained and written, because besides footnotes, which obviously make it very factual, there's that list of characters at the beginning. And now I understand why you would have written that, and I was referring back, to the list of characters, thinking, okay, this is who this person is to this person. Almost like a play where you get to know, all the individuals beforehand and their relationships to each other. So yeah, thank you for writing the book. I learned so much from it, and I'd love to know what's next for you.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a multi-year involvement, entanglement. It's left me a bit bereft, I must say. But I mean, there was just so much research that went into it, and they say that to write a book, like, you kind of have to kill your babies. Some of my favorite stories got left out, court cases that I saw, or bits on waste research that are lying around on my desk somewhere, but that I don't want to let go of. So I think I'll probably be writing some journalistic stories relating to the more waste research, I think.
That's great. And are you finding yourself, like John Steinbeck, keeping a diary of all the things that you're encountering?
Not so far. I love research, but I need to be a little more organized in terms of keeping a diary and recording everything I've seen. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, that might help. Well, that's really great. The book is obviously out now in the UK. It comes out in the US, or it has just come out as well?
No, it's out in India next month in August, and then in the US in the fall. And it will have a different title there. It is to be called Castaway Mountain. Yeah, and it's written a little bit differently too. So that was also a very interesting experience. It's written almost completely in third person.
Third person. Oh, okay, interesting. Was that a discussion you had with your US publisher then?
Yes. They felt that it felt so novel-like that I was interfering with the story.
Too close to you. Wow. Okay. That's so interesting.
You're coming between the reader and the story,
Right. Okay. Okay. I didn't feel that. In fact, there were times where I almost thought I was reading from the perspective of the character. At certain points, I was so kind of embedded in someone's individual life and story that I'd forgotten that even the wording, the way it's written, was from your perspective. Because there was so much detail that you must have had to pull out of everyone who's living there, and your relationship with each of them really comes across to the point where I'm in a room with them alone almost. So how could you have been there? So that was, that kind of reporting and that level of detail that you got out of all the different people in the book was really really worked. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, now it's just an opportunity to say to everyone who's listening, thank you for joining us for the Bottom Drawer series and for hearing about Saumya's book. I do hope you pick it up and have a read, because it's really fantastic and it's really going to stay with me. And yeah, if you're watching this on IGTV, Facebook, or YouTube, you can find all the other Bottom Drawer series also there and listed on our website. Thank you.